Hudson and for injury Marge. She's got a bit of presence. Relax, beautifully done.
Hi, I'm Mick Hudson. I'm a third generation stockman and dog trainer. Born and raised on a large 100,000 acre station in Western New South Wales, Australia. I was very fortunate to be brought up in a family of great stockmen, and I've had generations of knowledge passed on to me. The reading livestock is a big part of it. My father was a great stockman, running 10,000 sheep, cattle, mustering wild goats, and he taught us right from kids how to read and handle livestock and handle them calmly. And so I've been very fortunate in my career to have had that knowledge from my father handed to me, which allowed me to be good with dogs. My grandfather, Archie Hudson, won the Champion of Champions Sheepdog trial at Bathurst in 1953. My father, Pip Hudson, has represented Australia and has won numerous major titles throughout Australia with his working dogs. I'm also very proud of my twin boys training and educating their own working dogs to a high standard. I've had my share of success. My major achievements are winning the Supreme Australian Championship 3 times, the Commonwealth Championship 4 times, the Australian Championships, Australian Dog of the Year, the National Championships, New South Wales, Queensland and Tasmanian Championships, Champion of Champions twice at the Nationals, the Australian All-Round Stock Dog Champion, which consisted of cattle, yard and 3 sheep trials combined, represented New South Wales 6 times, Handler and Dog of the Year for New South Wales Sheepdog Workers Association numerous times, and most recently represented and captained Australia to a Test Series win against New Zealand. I currently own 3 properties on which I run cattle, sheep and goats, and together with my wife and 2 sons I manage my livestock enterprise with my working dogs. Learning to train and educate dogs and read livestock is a trade, and you won't learn that in 5 minutes. But if you are prepared to take it one stage at a time, this is achievable to anyone.
Today I'm joined by Mick Hudson. Mick is a multi-award winning dog educator and trial dog champion. Mick is a third generation trainer and stockman, born and raised on a large 100,000 acre station in Western New South Wales, Australia. Mick has won many awards, including winning the Supreme Australian Championship 3 times, the Commonwealth Championship 4 times, the Australian Championship, Australian Dog of the Year, the Australian All-Round Stock Dog Champion, which consisted of cattle and sheep trials, just to name a few. Mick has 3 properties in which he runs cattle, sheep and goats, and he's also put together a series of training lessons which takes you from selecting a pup right to the end result, to a fully educated dog, which I'm sure we'll come to talk about later, but there's also links to everything like that in the description. Mick has also appeared on the series Muster Dogs, where he has a litter of pups, and the pups go off to different handlers, and they all come back in a year to have a little competition to see which is best. You can also find that in the links below, and we'll come to talk about that as well. How are you this morning, Nick? Well, I'll say morning. It's morning for me, but this afternoon for you.
Good, thank you. Sorry, your name again?
Robin.
Good, thank you, Robin.
Oh, good. So, if you take me back to how did you start with dogs? Obviously, looking at sort of your videos, it looks, we mentioned that you've got a lot of land. Is it a part of Australia? Do you have to use dogs to farm there? How did you sort of start out, and why did you continue training with dogs?
Well, as a child, my father and grandfather used to train dogs together. We come from Western New South Wales, Australia, which is about 1,000 kilometres west of Sydney. It's probably 4,000 or 5,000 kilometres across the continent. And we come from a very hot, arid environment. It's only about a 12-inch rainfall for the year. We have edible bush scrub that the livestock live on in dry times called mulga. And we have some quite scrubby country, and we have hills, and we have all sorts of terrain, not steep hills, but rocky terrain that you flat out riding a motorbike over. So I guess dogs, we have a lot of wild goats in those areas because they've bred up. They escaped from the early settlers and bred into large numbers, hundreds of thousands, because the early settlers put water in all that country. We put underground water bores, and that's how we watered that land. Prior to that, there was nothing for 500 k's between the two rivers. So we've actually, as farmers, we've actually bred the kangaroos and the goats and the pigs and everything because we've put water in this arid country where there was never any water before. And I guess watching my father growing up, he was running 10,000 sheep on 100,000 acres there. And he needed dogs. He was a very strong competitor in Australia. He's represented Australia, captained Australia, beat the Kiwis. And I guess I grew up with dogs, and his father before him won the Champion of Champions in 1956, actually with UK lines initially. Or they came from UK lines, our dogs in Australia initially, many, many years ago. And I guess just watching, you go out on a motorbike, a two-wheel motorbike, two dogs on behind you, one dog on the front of you. You go into a 10,000-acre paddock. You need dogs that can travel, withstand the conditions. They've got to be able, they can't puff out quickly, mate. Our country, they've got to, and we rotate them dogs, and we might go and muster all day from, say, 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning right through till dark to try and clean the sheep out of 10,000 acres. And we start them sheep up and hunt them in a certain direction. And because they're fairly wild, they only get handled once or twice a year or 3 times a year. When you start them livestock up and point them in a direction and give them a good start up for a kilometre or so or half a kilometre, they'll just keep travelling in that direction generally. And we might sweep around, we might ride 10 k's that way and 5 k's that way and just grid it and try and get them all down the other end and put them in a mob and put them through a gate or into a holding paddock. And the dogs, you just can't do it without dogs. It's impossible. It's impossible to head wild sheep and change their direction to the direction you want them to go in because they are wild animals, mate. They get seen maybe twice a year or 3 times a year. And, I guess that's how come we needed dogs, and we used to muster the feral goats and sell them for an income. And the only way to get them's with a dog as well.
Okay, because, I'll take you back. You mentioned about your great-grandfather and the sort of the dogs from the sort of UK lines. I'm interested to sort of figure out the breeding of the dogs you have in Australia. Obviously, I think to say what you keep is Collies, am I right to say? And I'm just interested more in sort of the breeding, because I know sort of the UK border Collies we've got, I know they don't sort of love the heat. I noticed that a lot of your dogs are a bit whiter than we sort of get over here. So you kind of take me through sort of the breeding of the dogs you kept. Are they sort of mainly UK-based Collies, or what are they?
Mate, I don't want to upset anyone, but these dogs I want recognised as Australian Border Collies, and we've developed them here over the last 100 years. They obviously had crosses in them somewhere, but our dogs are pedigreed dogs, and we've selected them for their heading ability. We don't select dogs to drive, and we don't select dogs with bite. We select clean dogs with heading ability, and we teach the dogs to drive, rather than a lot of the UK dogs I see are happy to drive and don't hit the head cleanly. And a lot of the dogs I see over here, there's a lot of people bringing UK semen and dogs into Australia, and they're working cattle with them because they've got a lot of bite in them. The ones I'm seeing, I don't know a lot about the UK dogs, but these are strictly, I've kept these dogs strictly that we've developed over the last 80 years, Australian, and I want them recognised because we've selected for stamina, we've selected for trainability, and we've selected for clean strength, because I don't like dirty biting dogs because they get me into trouble. A clean dog for me, a birdie biting dog for me in my country, if he grabs an animal and chews on it, I lose the whole mob. I want a dog that can go around, get in front of him, pull him up and hold his ground. If an animal comes at him, he's allowed to nip it in self-defence, but he's not allowed to hang on to that. We cull that out. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you'd like to say sort of in the UK we do a lot of sort of driving away with the dogs, and then yes. What I noticed watching a lot of yours was how sort of calm and sort of easy your dogs were working the flock, whilst perhaps something more sort of UK based was sort of is trying to go right up to them and try and put really lot of pressure on for the flocks to move. That's really interesting. Sort of,
I think it's a different type of animal we're working to start with. And I guess I've been around the best handlers this country's had for the last 30 years. And when I was a kid growing up, and we've tried to, because I compete around Australia, we've tried to select dogs that sheep like. Do you understand that there's a presence dogs have and they either like them or they dislike them?
Yeah.
And the way I win competitions is I trick the sheep into liking me dog, and he takes me dog on, and he not scared of me dog, and me dog's actually got to move him in an appropriate manner, not by biting him. He might nip him, but he doesn't bite and upset him, and he doesn't. Our dogs have got to work at a consistent distance off their livestock. If the livestock are very wild and they're happy with the dog at 20 metres, we want him to just work at 20 metres, not start at 20 and end up at 1 and jamming the sheep and upsetting them. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely.
It's a completely, I know we work completely different here in Australia to New Zealand and the UK and potentially America, but it works for us because we're in big areas and we want dogs to, I guess the most important thing for me is cleanliness, no dirty bite, and heading ability, not short on the head. So I can actually teach dogs to drive, but they're heading dogs, and with a side command, I can teach them to drive, but their heading instinct must be there first.
Definitely, because obviously you need different skill sets for different challenges, and your sort of challenges of gathering is much different to us over here. So why don't you do quite as much driving then? Is it just sort of the style that you work with dogs?
No, we do.
But
yeah, well, we do actually drive our stock. Once we get our livestock together, because the animals here are wild, okay? You got wild goats, wild sheep, and they're taken off through the bushes. They're here and they're gone. So the dog's got to get right round in front and hold them stock and maybe cover some that are breaking out. And then when we work them for 10 or 15 minutes and settle them, and then when we get them together, then we start driving. So what we do is we get behind the mob, and the dog works the wing and the head. So if the sheep start to string out, he goes to the front and holds them again, and then he comes back to the side or the tail and helps me drive. But until we don't ever want livestock running, we teach our livestock to walk. And it's different. I watch a lot of videos in the UK. They got their stock running a lot. If we were to let our stock run 10 Ks, we'd never get them to the yard. So we've got to teach our livestock to walk, and the way we do that's with a heading dog. Every time the sheep get a trot up, he goes to the front, he stops them, he comes back, they walk a bit. If they start to trot, he stops them. So we educate our animals to walk, cattle, sheep and goats.
Yeah,
because we can't take them big distances at a run. You can take them 300 metres in a kilometre, but we can't afford to do that because we'll have sheep laying down and cattle peeling off. And so I guess that's why we need heading dogs, because we need to stop that run all the time.
Yeah. And obviously your dogs have to work in sort of, very extreme heat as well, don't they? So they couldn't sort of expend sort of energy. How do you sort of, I'm quite interested, how do you sort of navigate using dogs in such, in the heat, or do you sort of try and work in cooler times? I'm just sort of figuring out how do you sort of, or are your dogs bred to be used to the heat? I'm quite interested in that.
Well, genetically, we've bred dogs that travel, and the word travel, I mean, they've got stamina and energy and they're lighter type dogs. But we also have to manage that. So you've got to watch your dogs in this real hot country, because a good dog will work till he cooks himself and gets himself overheated. So we carry a little bit of water. We mainly put water on the top of the head if they're getting hot, and give them a drink. But the main thing is we rotate. And by rotating them, dogs keeps them cool. Yeah. So one's starting to get a bit hot, he goes on the back of the bike, and another one goes out for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and he comes back onto the back of the bike, and another one goes out. And I guess that's how I manage the severe heat.
So how many dogs do you own, and then how many dogs would you use when you go out gathering or mustering? How does the rotation work?
Well, I own 20 odd dogs. That's from pups through to retired dogs. And my retired dogs stay with me. I've just retired a female that's probably got a greater record than any other dog in Australia. She's won every major title in Australia numerous times, and she's been a great station dog, and she's top scored in 2 winning test teams against the Kiwis. She's been the top scoring dog out of Australia and New Zealand, and we've won both those test series. But getting back to your question, the rotation is I've got 20 dogs. I'm going out mustering for a week. I take 3 today. I might take a young dog and 2 experienced dogs, because those young dogs need experience. We get the mob under control. And if I see a dog getting hot, because they will get hot, any dog will get hot in 40-degree environments, we just put that one on the back and give the other one a go. And then when he's getting a bit warm and the stock is settling a bit, you give the young dog a go. And I can only cart 3 dogs on the motorbike, so it's a maximum of 3. And I need 3 for the rotation. Much better mustering here in the wintertime. You can muster with the dog all day if he's fit and healthy, you know.
So would your trials be more winter time then for that, or do you trial?
Most certainly. Very few trials are run in the summertime here. It's too hot, and a lot of the people's dogs aren't fit enough to handle that, because they don't, you know, there could be 70 to 80% of our competitors now are not actually on big stations or farms. They're retired people, or they're people coming out of the city, you know.
Okay, so what sort of the dog buying market like in Australia? Do you sort of buy dogs? Do you more breed them yourself? And then what sort of prices are we looking at over there in Australia?
We just seen 2 dogs sold in the cattle industry for $35,000 and $38,000.
Wow, okay.
I'm watching an online auction today, and the leading dog there, a 4-year-old bitch, hasn't met reserve, and she's up at about $15,500. But the average price for a good sort of a handy dog, you know, I'd say, you know, anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000. Yeah, dollars. Pups, anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000 or $4,000, you know. Yeah.
So you mentioned sort of sheepdog trials earlier. What I found fascinating was, I think your sheepdog trials, correct me if I'm wrong, but mostly on football fields, ovals, which is sort of, as we mentioned, different to sort of UK trials where sort of a lot bigger fields, lots of running. But just what I noticed, we've got similar sort of obstacles, sort of pens, shoots and runs. Talk me through sort of maybe the challenges of Australian sheepdog trials, and maybe compare them to what you've seen sort of Europe, UK, America.
Well, in the Australian sheepdog trials, we're generally working runny merino sheep, and merino sheep are pretty wild, generally speaking. Unless they've come off a farm where someone's a good handler and they've been presented well. But a lot of the times now the sheep aren't presented as well as they should be. So we're basically dealing with these wild animals. We've got a, say, 100-metre cast. The dog's to cast out, run out, get behind the sheep, try and give the sheep some room where they pull up. You don't want them jamming the sheep because they upset them to start with. You want them back 20 or 30 metres behind their sheep. The rule is that the sheep should be a minimum of 20 metres out off the fence, and that could still be 100 metres, because most of them overs will be 120 or 30 metres long. The ideal thing for us is to have an introduction with our dog so the sheep aren't scared, and we've got to bring them sheep in a straight line, an imaginary corridor, no further than 8 metres wide. We lose points if they deviate out of the corridor. We bring the sheep straight down to us. I suggest at a steady rate, because you're trying to introduce these dogs. You're not lighting a fire and chasing them, that you've got to put it out. That's why you see a lot of white dogs, and sheep like white dogs in Australia, because they're not as scared of a black dog or and they haven't got the presence, or a yellow dog. And they've got a delivery area or somewhere you've got to cross a line before you can walk. Then you must keep those sheep in a marked corridor, no further than 8 metres in front of you, no further than 8 metres behind you, and they must stay in the corridor or you lose points. We come to a race or a gap, put them through the gap, another corridor to a bridge, another corridor to a pen. And we start with 100 points and they deduct the points as you go. It's a lot of time. It's 15 minutes. It's a bit like watching paint dry. but it's very, we get the New Zealanders come here. We have a Trans-Tasman competition. New Zealand comes, the 4 best New Zealanders compete against the 4 best Australians every year. One year we go to New Zealand and the opposing year they come to Australia. They train very hard to compete with us because we do not help our dogs. We're not allowed, we get pointed for helping our dogs. So we're not allowed to block a sheep or use our arm or our hand or our voice to block a sheep. Okay. If a competitor, that's the main difference because the Kiwis help their dogs a lot. And I see the UK people helping their dogs a lot, but it was designed in Australia that you ought to stand there like a statue and not to help your dog. He does all of the work.
So sort of, would that sort of to be more accurately to reflect sort of how you'd work sheep on the farm? Because I know trials here, the sort of idea is that the challenges sort of reflect sort of the working life. So would that sort of to be reflect more accurately sort of working life in Australia?
Well, I guess so. I mean, mate, I can't be talking and whistling to a dog all day. And I can't be doing his side or my side or whatever. So I guess we feel that they're there to do the job for us, and they're educated to do the job. And we don't. There is a lot of people in Australia now whistling dogs and commanding dogs constantly, which I don't like. I like to educate dogs to know how to do 90% of it themselves. And if I've got to talk to them, it's only if they're in the wrong spot.
Oh, great. So do you look at any sort of American, European handlers to see what they do? Do you sort of keep up with sort of that, or do you very just concentrate on yourself?
I'm certainly very interested in what's going on around the world. I mean, I've heard all those names in America. I've heard a lot of names in the UK. I think, is it Ricky Hutchison's been out here? Alan Owen's been out here.
Yeah.
They're selling this dog semen out here on that auction today. They were selling them 3 dogs from the UK semen. I'm going to stick with my Aussie dogs. I want to see the rest of the world see how good our Aussie dogs are, but no one seems to know about them. It seems the rest of the world, the rest of the world's got an extension lead, mate. There's one in the lounge room so I can plug it into there. But yeah, look, I don't doubt our dogs started from the UK lines initially, and we've just had to change our way we bred them. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. Something I was going to ask you about, which I found very fascinating, is I heard you on a video calling yourself an educator and sort of maybe not a trainer, and you sort of explained the differences between a trainer and an educator. Could you sort of do that for this audience and sort of take me through sort of your philosophies and principles when you're training a dog?
Well, I'm very fortunate to have been around the best handlers Australia's ever seen. And I guess a lot of people think, and a lot of people do it nowadays, they tell the dog, make the dog mechanical. Left, right, stop, walk up, get back, come over, whatever they do. I don't think the way I want to educate the dog without command. I want to educate him to know how to cover, to know when to ease off, to know when to walk up, to know when to go to the front, to know when to come back. So I guess I don't want to be known as a dog trainer, and I think I've had my success because we can't think as quick as a dog. You know, I can read sheep very well, and I can read cattle, and I can read goats, but the time it takes you to tell a dog to cover an animal, the animal's got past the dog. So I want to teach people to educate the dog and do not make the dog mechanical. I see so many people now whistling at dogs constantly, telling dogs go left, telling dogs go right, telling dogs get out of it. My basics of training come from a 90-year-old gentleman. I used to watch this gentleman at trials. He had very little command on his dogs, but his dogs knew the job. And I guess that's what I wanted to be Mick, I've got very good command on my dogs, but I speak to them softly, and I only speak to them if they're in the wrong spot, because I try and educate them to know how to do the job.
So would your sort of commands just mostly be to correct their positioning instead of sort of maybe sort of here in the UK we sort of tell them where to go kind of thing?
Yeah, no, I try and educate a dog to cast out round the sheep and him know where the right distance is and know where the balance points are, and I'm not say a word to him and let him slowly bring them dead straight himself. I shouldn't have to say come left, come right, walk up, get back. So I try and educate dogs to do 90% of it or 80% of themselves. If they're slightly out, and I'm talking it could be 6 foot, it could be 3 foot, they might have just didn't come up at the right time, I will command then just to put them in the exact right position. You know what I'm saying?
Because sort of, I think the most frequently used command sort of over here would be sort of the stand whistle. In sort of in trials, I know I'm always constantly telling the dog to stand, stand, stand. But sort of watching sort of your trials, I found of your own dogs finding their own pace naturally. Is that something you train into them?
Most certainly. There's something I do, I call it touching livestock. And what we educate dogs to do is when the dog's coming in towards sheep and the sheep move, he stops himself naturally. And I educate dogs to do that. And if the sheep go to drift off, he stands still and he only moves to correct their position. And then he comes up again. But what a lot of people do is their dogs come up and keep following stock when they move or when they turn them. And I call this touching livestock. So we educate dogs to come up. And I'll try and explain the word touch, the dog could be 15 metres away and the sheep's ears raised and the sheep's turned off the dog and started to go. That's what I call touching livestock. The dogs touch the livestock from 15 metres away. Okay, but that could happen. That could happen at 5 metres. It could happen at 1. And what we do is we decrease. By doing that, we decrease the distance over the course of a dog trial. So they start out at 20. They touch the livestock move. Dog stops. He moves in an arc, or I think you call it a flank position, out and straightens them again and stops again. And what we're doing is we're quietening this animal, and then next time the dog moves, the sheep allow him to come into 15 metres, 10 metres, 5 metres, 3 metres, and at the time I'm going to the pen, the sheep are happy with the dog at 2 metres. Yeah, and we call that touching livestock. I've come up with the theory that we educate dogs to touch livestock, not chase them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what age do you start sort of the training process? I know sort of over here we sort of let them sort of play with sheep as soon as they're sort of ready to, sort of when they're interested. Is that sort of same way it works in Australia? And sort of you set sort of expectations you expect the dog to reach by a certain age? How do you sort of go about sort of the early training?
I'm not waiting 12 months for a pup to go to work. Okay, and I think it's a genetic thing. I've seen it in different lines of dogs. So I believe there's a sweet period between 8 and 12 weeks that we must switch the instinct on in the pup, which I do. We rear them pups. We spend a lot of time with them for the first 8 to 12 weeks. But I want to switch all of them pups' instinct on between 8 and 12 or 13 weeks. If there's something wrong, if a pup's not showing interest, I don't like that. I look at the genetics and go, where did that come from? I want to see pups switch on pretty well between 8 and 12 weeks. And that's not a training. That's just switching the instinct on. We let them chase and we let them have a bit of a play and we grab them quick and we take that fun away from them to build their desire. So next time they see livestock, it was fun and you took it away from me. Yeah. So, but we don't start training them then until they're about, what we do is we look at the litter of pups and we're looking for natural instinct in those first initial 5 or 6 shows of sheep. We're looking to see what this pup does naturally. Does he cut sheep off? Does he naturally go to the head? Did he look to bite a sheep? Because what he's showing you is what he is. And so then I'll select what I think's the best couple of pups out of them to go on with. And I'm looking at that early natural instinct to see what's there. You know what I'm saying? Because I am a big fan of, as a saying of mine, what you start with is what you end up with.
Oh yeah, that's very interesting. Would you sort of do any obedience training alongside sort of working? I know a lot of people like here like to put them on a con lead, do sits, do sort of make them learn to sort of sit, lie down, stand sort of off the sheep, sort of obedience like that. Would you sort of do anything like that, or is your sort of main goal working, farm work, concentrate
Well,
on that?
I'm a bit lazy. I'm a bit lazy, so I'm not. My wife would teach pups to lead and tie up only,
Hmm.
and maybe teach them their name. But I'm not into dry training at all because I don't want mechanical dogs. I want to
Okay.
educate. I want to educate them on livestock, and I can do the same job on livestock as people. As long as the livestock are well educated and quiet, you need suitable livestock to train dogs on. You can't put them on runny sheep, you know.
Hmm.
But I feel, and Greg Prince, my uncle, one of Australia's best ever seen, he didn't do dry training either. So we're not much into the dry training. Now, yes, we'll put a pup on a long lead to teach him his name. And yes, we'll teach him to tie up first before we even try and teach him his name so he understands the pressure on his collar when you call him, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so how does the first sort of, maybe once they've grown a bit, how does the training look like? Is it, do you use a flock of three? Would you use a stick? What would you sort of teach them in
Oh,
the early days
yeah.
first?
Yeah, well, we have some sort of a training aid. You could use a nice leaf rake to block the pup and make him aware of the training aid. And I believe there's two things that you need that most important to educate a dog is your body and your training aid.
Hmm.
And the dog's got to respect both of those things. And we condition dogs to that. And once you've conditioned them to reward and discipline, well, it's all pretty straightforward from there on, you know.
Yeah. Is there any sort of common mistakes you see with people in the early stages of training? Is there anything that stands out you see, like, or maybe a misconception, sort of the early training that you sort of disagree with? Do you sort of see
I
people
think, yeah. Well,
making?
the main thing for me is people are telling pups what to do,
Hmm.
sit and go left and go right, and the pup doesn't understand a word of it. Like they're talking to the pup and they're breaking the pup's concentration because they've got a bond with it and they're confusing the dog. Whereas what I do and what I teach is we keep our mouth zip, no noise, none whatsoever, and we educate the pup with our training aid and body.
So sort
And
of,
because so that's the biggest thing I see. And this stop, sit, sit, sit. Like I want to educate the dog to pull up and pause. I want to educate the dog to know when to do that. He doesn't. I teach the dog to stop without a word, and then later on, I just block him and teach him to stand without any words. And then later on, I've only got to introduce the word stop, and he understands it. So he's taught how to do things before I put any commands on him. So we don't say nothing to the dog. We teach the dog how to work properly, the right distance, pull up, balance, and everything's done. And when he's at 12 months or 10 months or he's doing everything right, well, then it's very easy for me to put the command on everything that he's doing.
so when you're sort of picking out sort of a child dogs, do you sort of train them all the same and then sort of pick one maybe more suitable to the child, or do you sort of expect maybe all your working dogs to be suitable for child, and it's just the ones that stand out with sort of quality you would take? Is the training process the same sort of for you in Australia? Is it the sort of challenges of trials and farming work the same?
No, I think all dogs are different.
Okay.
All dogs have got faults.
Hmm.
If someone's waiting for this perfect champion dog to turn up and they're not prepared to fix a few faults, they're never going to get one. So I train all dogs differently. Some dogs need more pressure. Some dogs need less pressure. Some dogs need building up. Some dogs need taken down. So, or coming down off a high. But all dogs are different and we've got to treat them differently. But the main thing to understand as a trainer is each dog's different. They're all going to have some faults. I want dogs with the least amount of faults because they're the easiest to train. And you just got to understand how much pressure is too much or not enough for each individual dog. And once you understand that, you got to treat them as individuals. You only put the amount of pressure on a dog that he needs, no more, no less.
Hmm. So take me through sort of sort of the sort of the best sort of dogs you've had, or sort of best dogs you've seen, what qualities do stand out with them? What makes them special, in your opinion? What do you sort of like to see in a dog? What makes the top ones special?
All of my special dogs, and I do educate dogs to hold their head on their stock. I educate that. I don't like dogs running and not watching where their stock is. So all of my champion dogs hold their head on their stock, so they know where the point is to pull up. But I educate that also. It's genetic, but it can be educated and it can be taken out of a dog if people are hunting dogs as well. You know what I'm saying? So that, the second most important thing for me is cleanliness. In Australia, I call it cleanliness, clean strength, no dirty bite, no hang on. And the third thing for me is dogs that want to work with you, not ignorant. So my best dogs ever, they're not mechanical, but if I ask them to do something, they do it straight away. So if I said go left, the dog would go left straight away on one command. If I said stop, the dog will stop on one command. If I said come right, the dog will move right on one command. And I mean, that's the secret to success. You want dogs that are biddable and happy to work with you without being mechanical.
You mentioned at the beginning that you work sheep, cows and goats. You expected all your dogs to run on sort of all three of the animals? Do you do each sort of cow, sheep, goat provide different challenges for your dogs? How do you sort of navigate sort of that? Because sort of here in UK, that's quite. I know a cow herd is quite popular in America. It's not quite as much more common in the UK. Certainly not goats. What sort of different challenges do each different animal bring? Well, the clean, strong dogs you need in all of them. There's no substitute. There's no substitute for cleanliness in a dog. And I'm trying to educate people in Australia that are breeding, biting dogs, that are grabbing the ears, chewing the belly on sheep, grabbing the back leg on goats. All the winners, we get disqualified in Australia if a dog bites a sheep. Yeah. He's allowed to nip it or move it or nip it in self-defence. Okay. Cattle, we have cattle competitions in Australia. I've never seen the dogs that are winning the cattle trials. That's clean, strong dogs that walk up to the cattle and tell the cattle, "You must go because I'm good enough to do it." But so I guess when you're working clean, strong dogs that are biddable, that's the secret. Whether you're working cattle, sheep, or goats, there's no substitute for clean strength. And I've always been a big believer that dirty biting dogs are actually weak. They're cheap shotters. Do you understand what I'm saying? So, because they're not strong enough. They're not strong enough themselves to move them. Therefore, they need to nip. That's right. They have to bite. That's right. So, and I mean, but yes, we've got weaker dogs in Australia and we've got stronger dogs, and it's a fine line to get that right. You probably want pretty strong dogs on cows and calves, or unbroken cattle, but you don't really need them hanging on. They just got to pull up, hold their ground, let the beast come to them, hold their ground, give him a little nip and turn him around. But dogs that are running in, grabbing them on the ear or grabbing them on the leg, they actually blow the animals up. You get what I'm saying? So, yeah, I think the secret for any animal for me is cleanliness. And I call it strong, a strong dog, a clean dog. A dog that will hold his ground, he'll walk right up to the animal's face, but he only bites in self-defence or only nips in self-defence or to move a stubborn animal. He doesn't bite indiscriminately. I'll tell you something that I've learned in my years. The animals are a better judge of a dog than the people. So why are these dogs so successful, or that you'll see particular dogs being successful all the time? And my belief is that they have got an ability to tell the animals, I am good enough, you walk off me. But if he's a weak dog, you could take him to 10 trials and he'll get stuck up 8 times because that different mobs of animals can pick him. So I'm a big fan of the animals tell me what sort of a dog I've got. So I'd like to ask you a bit about the sort of Mr. Dog series that I think in the UK, I think it's on Amazon Prime, I think. links will be in the description for people watching where they can find it. It's quite a fascinating concept that, if in case nobody's seen, you had a litter of pups, and then there's a TV series that was sent out to different handlers, and then in a year's time, they came back for a little trial to see which ones, had improved the best. Is there anything you sort of learned with that? Because obviously, rarely do you kind of get the opportunity to see how each dog in a litter progresses. Is there anything you sort of learnt from that, and what sort of did you take away from that, or sort of the experience as a whole?
No, I didn't learn anything from it, because obviously I'm a better handler than them. We're getting these dogs are going out to just average Joe that wants a dog on their farm. So in the next series that you haven't seen, we've actually done more training with the students and tried to get them people to understand how to train a dog better. But no, the people were coached to a degree, and they done very well. I didn't learn anything from it. I learnt that these people need to be helped and taught how to educate an animal, because they've done a really good job, and they're all very committed, but they don't have the knowledge to do it without someone helping them. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, but sort of, did you see? Because am I right to say that the pups were all from the same litter? Yeah. So did you sort of, when in a year's time or 2 years' time, as you said, in the next series, did sort of the pups all sort of demonstrate the sort of similar traits you'd expect to see in the litter? Because it's quite, I don't know, maybe sort of a UK, we don't sort of get the opportunity to see everything in the litter, in one sort of go, one trial like that. Is there anything you sort of observed with the litter?
Well, there's 10 pups in that litter, and every one of those pups ended up a good working dog.
Okay.
Yes, some are better than others. There was only 6 went on the series. I kept 2 for myself. I was actually left with 2. I didn't get to pick them, but because they want the different colours and shapes and stuff on the series. But all of those pups have made good dogs, every one of them. But I've got a quality control with my dogs. I start them pups between 8 and 12 weeks, and I will not let them pups go if I don't think they're showing the ability and the goodness of what makes a good dog. So if someone wants to take a baby pup off me at 8 weeks that's not started, that's your risk. But I'll have a look at the pups. I'll make sure the genetics is right. I'll make sure the ability's right. And I've done that actually, we've just done it for this will be my 3rd series, 3 litters of collie pups.
Okay.
So I know the qualities. I know the qualities right before they leave here. It's up to the people, because they're already started. They're already started, and the instincts in them before they go. Because my biggest concern is if they go to someone that doesn't switch them on between 8 and 12 weeks, we could get halfway through this series and find out that the dog's not working, and that's not going to look good for me. So I make sure that the pups are started before they go.
Yeah, because I was wondering that sort of in my sort of training head, that I thought, oh gosh, what would happen if they didn't work? But obviously you put the time in to make sure that they would, which was fascinating. What's your favourite part about training? What do you enjoy? What sort of makes you keep training and sort of farming dogs? Not necessarily, outside of having, needing them to sort of work. What keeps you back? What makes life enjoyable when you're training dogs?
Well, firstly, I'm always trying to improve on the breed. So someone's improved on it 80 years ago, and I believe the dogs of today are getting better and better all the time. I know everyone talks about the good old dogs, but when I started dog trialing at age 18, a score of 70 was a pretty good score, or 80. Then no one had sides on their dogs. Their dogs weren't very highly trained. Nowadays, you need 95, 94, 92 to make a final. I believe the dogs have improved, and I believe the handlers have been improved through training, through education on how to work a dog. But I guess the most fascinating thing for me is breeding and improving the breed, and watching that improve each time I try and breed dogs. I'm always trying to improve the breed better quality.
So does your sort of enjoyment from training your dogs come from sort of improving yourself, improving the sort of obviously the breed. But what do you enjoy sort of anything specific day to day? Sort of.
Oh, I do love seeing a young pup improving, and I love to see nice natural ability. But I guess the main goal is for me to leave this world improving the breed to a standard that's pretty high. And I get enjoyment out of starting a litter of pups and just seeing what's there naturally. And I know pretty much. Like I said earlier, I'm a big fan of what you see early is what you're going to end up with.
Because I've seen you mention a few times actually the sort of the importance of sharing information and sort of improving the breed as a whole, as you said. Do you want to sort of tell sort of people watching about your training series? Maybe tell us what would they expect when they watch it? What sorts of things do you like to show? What sort of your methods? Do you want to sort of talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, it's basically what I said earlier. It's educating dogs how to work livestock properly. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's my methods are educating dogs how to work livestock properly before speaking to the dog. And I show people how to educate dogs properly before speaking to the dog. That is the main focus of my training program. And I go into selecting pups. I talk about genetics. I talk about stamina. I talk about types of dogs. We talk about genetics is quite in depth because you don't get champions out of bushes. Champions come from. Okay, so
yeah,
I'm a big fan that genetics plays a major part. And I'd like to tell all your viewers, I learnt this off a gentleman that had greyhounds in Australia, and I asked him one night, I was managing 120,000 acres of property for him. I said, how do you breed champions? You breed from the best, hope for the best, but if you breed with dogs with faults, expect to get them. And that's the theory I work on. Breed from the dogs with the least amount of faults.
Because well, this might be a sort of stupid British person question, but sort of in Australia as well, because I see some people using Kelpie dogs. Am I right to sort of muster what would be the difference between the two breeds, and obviously why do you sort of go down sort of the collie route sort of for your farm work?
Well, I guess it's a bit like Ford and Holden in Australia. Some people like Fords and some people like Holdens.
Okay.
Yeah, but I was brought up with collies, so I guess I like collies. I've had Kelpies throughout my life, and I still have Kelpies. But the Australian Kelpie, I believe, was developed in Australia for farmers for Australian conditions, and I believe he was bred just for natural ability. And farmers in Australia of the past, 50 years ago, or 60 years ago, or 40 years, or even 30 or 20, they just took a dog into the paddock and they wanted this most natural dog that trained himself. They didn't know how to train a dog. He learned on the job. And that's how they developed the Kelpie, because the training's only come in the last 20 or 30 years. So the difference is, from my point of view, the Kelpies are quite arrogant and ignorant, very good dogs, but don't like taking command. The collies that we've bred are more biddable and more trainable and more happy to work with you, and they can handle a bit more pressure. The Kelpies don't. I think they bred them for natural ability, which they're very good at, and they train, and they've just done the job. They go back, come behind. That's all they had on them. And the dogs just learnt to do the whole job themselves. But for competitions, you can't have a dog being ignorant. He must do as you tell him. And I like dogs doing as I tell them in the paddock, even mustering. I don't like dogs. You hear people screaming at dogs, come here, like whistling. The dog's saying, bugger you, Jack, I know what I'm doing. So I think the major difference, they're a very good animal. They're bred for Australian conditions, but they've bred them for a lot of natural ability and forgot about the other traits you need which is trainability.
Okay. I was going to ask you actually, because sort of over here, if we're sort of working two dogs together, we would use different sets of commands for the two different dogs. Is that something you do, or sort of, if I'm having a sense sort of in conversation that, you know, you expected sort of the dogs to work on their own, would you use different dogs with different commands, or are they all on the same commands? How do you sort of navigate that?
Yeah, my father competed against New Zealand in the doubles. They worked two dogs, and he actually beat the Kiwis with the doubles, but he actually specifically trained for that. But we don't normally do that. We generally, if there was a big mob of wild goats running away, I'd send 3 dogs or 2 dogs, and they would just go on head and cover and do all the work themselves. I wouldn't want to be giving them commands. You know, I might call one dog's name, come back here, Ken, and you go, okay, you want me. But it's probably only the name, really. It's only just, or stop there, Ken, go someone else. You know what I'm saying? So, but we don't know. We don't work dogs. If dogs are working together, they're working fairly naturally. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But generally speaking, I'd rather have one dog on the ground and rotating dogs. You know, I don't like working them as a pack. You know, like I just don't like. Never been taught to do that. I've always rotated dogs, and there's one on the ground and he's doing the job. I don't even like, if I was mustering with someone, mate, you have your dogs on the ground and I'll put my dogs up, or I put my dogs on the ground and you put your dogs up. I don't like crossing over, and certainly not someone trying to work your dogs, you know?
Yeah,
Is
definitely.
that the same for you? So,
yeah, that's sort of similar here. Sort of kind of teach the dog to, you know, you train a dog to be able to work on its own, essentially, don't you? So that you'd expect them to do that. I was just sort of curious, really, with, you mentioned sort of trials against New Zealand, and sort of the travel with sort of sheepdog trials, because obviously Australia is a much bigger country than obviously the UK. Probably Americans would sort of more understand this. How is it sort of, how difficult is sort of the travel when it comes to sheepdogs? And would you sort of ever come over sort of this side of the world for trials anytime? I'm just curious with sort of how the dogs deal with travel, and what sort of going to a trial looks like for you.
that's a very good question, and we are on a very large continent. We have 6 states in Australia, and we have New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, Tasmania, Western Australia, South Australia. So what happens is each state of Australia has formed their own working dog association, and you can cross over if you can cross over whenever you want, but the distance is the problem. So what they've done in Australia, they formed an Australian association and 6 state associations. And what we do once a year, we all come together at the Supreme Australian Championship, which moves to a different state each year. So everyone's got equal amount of travel, and we get the best 3 handlers from each state of Australia to compete against each other to pick our top 4 representatives for Australia. So you're mixing with the whole lot of them once a year. And if I want to travel to Western Australia and trial, I can. You know, I can travel the 4,000 Ks and I can compete at any trial in Australia. Do you understand? But once I'm a member of my own state, that allows me to compete in any other trial in Australia.
Okay, we're kind of sort of drawing to the end of the hour. What sort of advice would you give sort of any? Well, no. Well, I'll ask this: what's something you think sort of a European, a UK handler could sort of learn from a sort of an Australia sort of different style, and what sort of advice would you give any sort of handler looking to learn that may be watching this right now?
Mate, firstly, what could I give beginners? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah.
Beginner handlers? So,
well, yeah.
Firstly, pick a good trainer and stick with them. There's no silver bullet. If you think you're going to jump from trainer to trainer to trainer, you're going to run into trouble because they've all got different methods. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, you need to start with the best genetically bred dog you can start with. You can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. So you don't win Melbourne Cups with bush horses. You win Melbourne Cups that come out of the Magic Million stables. I just want to make that very clear to people. Stick with one trainer. If it's not working, change trainers, but don't jump from trainer to trainer to trainer to trainer because you're going to get confused. The second question is, what could the UK learn off Australia, was it?
Yeah, if anything comes to mind.
I've got to be very careful because it's a different world.
Yeah.
But me, personally, I watch a bit of it. I just think that I don't know how big your paddocks are over there. I can see the dogs casting a long way, but the handlers seem to be communicating with their dogs a hell of a lot. And I think they could probably learn to let dogs work a bit. You know, I'm only watching competitions.
Yeah. Well,
let dogs do it. Let dogs do a bit themselves and show me how good your dog is without you telling him how to do it.
Well, yeah, because I can't speak for anybody else, but that was definitely applicable to me starting out. I think maybe it comes from sort of you're trying to micromanage your dog. Maybe it comes from sort of the insurity of sort of your dog, and then sort of in the UK trials, as you mentioned before, there's a lot of running. So I think handlers do quite a lot of like little tweaks, little movements. But certainly what makes, I think over here in UK, what makes an excellent dog is something that can run on its own and sort of do it on its own. So yeah, I would definitely agree with you there. It's something that maybe I might try and do myself.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of young Australians, and I don't know where they're getting it from, but they're whistling at dogs constantly. And I say on my training video, whistles were designed to communicate with dogs at distance.
Yeah.
They're not designed to fry a dog at 20 metres from you. Because I don't feel that a dog can take all of those commands constantly with someone just frying them by going left, right, stop. And I think the dogs become a bit ignorant to it because they're constantly whistling at them. So I'm not a fan of this whistling, and there's a lot around the world do it. I like to talk to me dogs just in a nice tone, soft tone, quietly. Because dogs have got very good hearing. Everyone wants to yell at a dog. The dog can hear you. You just got to make sure you're just thinking he can't hear you, and what you're doing is you're upping the level by yelling. He can hear you. He's just being ignorant.
Yeah.
But certainly we are in a different part of the world. I'm educating people to educate dogs without being spoken to, and let's hope that dog can do 70 or 80% of that job without being spoken to. Yes, they're all going to need to be spoken to, but at some point. But that's my basis on the training, is educate dogs and keep their mouth shut. Yes, when you get into competition, if he's in the wrong spot, move him. But let's try and educate him as good as we can and let him learn. Dogs have got to make mistakes to learn. You can't educate a dog by making him mechanical and telling him how to do it. He's got to learn how to do it.
Yeah. Definitely. That's definitely something I'm going to try and do myself. Is there any way you'd like people watching to go to look at? I know you've got a website. Is there anything, your chance now down the camera? Is there anything you would like to send people? You go for it.
We've got a Facebook page and a website. Mick Hudson Livestock Hand. Mick Hudson. I'll just find it for you.
Yeah. I'll just tell people that all the links you talk about will be wherever they find this, if they want that, go that way.
I'll just tell you the exact name of it, because I've got to switch pages on my Facebook. Mick Hudson Virtual Dog Training and Livestock Handling. Education, I call it.
Yeah.
I've lost your Zoom. How do I get you back? I think I've got you back.
Yeah.
There's one thing we do that I'd like to tell you about that I don't know that many other people are doing in the world. And I'm that busy that I'm pleased it hasn't gone mad, but I've coached 3 people in the last 18 months to win major titles in Australia. And what I'm doing is virtual training. So once someone's brought my program, if they're having trouble, I get a 5-minute video on Dropbox. I do a voiceover. I can see all the mistakes or what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong, and I do a voiceover and help you educate that dog through virtual training. So you can be in America or the UK and you can have me at your fingertip.
Mm.
And like I said, I had 2 pretty greenhorns that I've been coaching virtually for 18 months, and they've both won major titles in Australia. But they were committed and they were sending me 1 or 2 virtual lessons a week.
Mm.
And so I think the beauty of the technology today with virtual training, and I don't need any more than I've got, like I'm not, but it does work exceptionally well because you can watch that 5-minute video over and over, and I'll say, your dog just squeezed there. You ask it to stop 9 times. If you ask a dog to stop, you ask it once and step into it. You're making that dog ignorant. Or I say, your dog just didn't hold a consistent distance, or you didn't position yourself at that time, or your dog done this, or your dog did. And I just do a voiceover as it's happening, and it's working exceptionally well for a small fee to have me at your fingertips, because it's too far to come here for private lessons. You know what I mean?
Well, it sounds amazing, because I know that's what a lot of people starting out struggle with, is access to sort of professionals like yourself, because, you know, it depends where you live, you can't always talk. So the technology is great with that. And also what you say with talking over dogs, I think as handlers, we can sometimes go blind to our own dogs' fault, and sort of showing our dogs to somebody new, and especially somebody, you know, like yourself, that you'll see something in the dog that sort of somebody training themselves wouldn't you? So they know. That's something, I think,
and oftentimes, probably 50% of the time, I'm seeing it in the handler as well.
Mm.
Like a typical one is stop, 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 and the dog hasn't stopped once. People don't even know they're doing it. So, but I see it straight away. I said, all you're doing is making that dog ignorant to the word stop. So you need to teach that dog stop means stop once. I always try and teach dogs on one command, because I feel that if you start reusing the command, the dog gets accustomed to that. He doesn't move when you ask him to move, or you know what I'm saying?
Can I just ask your opinion on this then? What I do with my dogs, I have a big stop that makes them lie down, and then I have a smaller stop that makes them slow down, and then I've got another smaller stop that makes them sort of creep. Is that something, if I showed you that, was that something you'd tell me, actually, I'd check on that, because I've had that sort of feedback in sort of trials myself. Is that something you wouldn't do, is the stop means stop?
Well, I wouldn't. I'm not saying you can't do it.
Yeah,
I'm not saying it's not achievable.
Yeah.
But I would have stop, steady, lie down.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, because I don't want to confuse the dog. He's only working off your tone. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you very much. I was really keen to do this because it's, as a sort of a Brit, I'll be honest, it's sort of the Australian sheepdogs is not something I've ever looked at, or, you know, thought to look at, really. You know, that's sort of a fault of myself. So I really hope that everybody watching sort of, I think there's definitely takeaways that, you know, we in Britain can use from sort of the Australian side of it. So thank you very much for coming on, and have a great rest of your day.